I think that's art at a different level because it goes far beyond lyrics. It's the arrangements, the tone, the emotional placement of each song. Everything shifts. Moments hit differently because they transpired through the story. Hey music lovers, Sara J here. Looking for an inclusive space where you can connect with fellow fans, deep dive into your favorite music, and be a part of something special? Well, look no further. Join us on Patreon, where music and community come together. Get exclusive content, behind-the-scenes access, and a place to geek out over the artists you love. Plus, explore music you haven't heard yet. Come hang out with us. Patreon.com/DATC Media Company. That's patreon.com/DATC Media Company. See you there. A member of the DATC Media family. This episode may contain spoilers for It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken. If you're planning to see this production, maybe come to this podcast after. There is also a review over on the Patreon, patreon.com/DATC Media Company. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me for this week of Dropped Among This Crowd. I'm your host, Sara J. And this week on the show, I am so excited to share all about my experience of getting the opportunity to go and see the very new production, It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken. I had the extreme pleasure on Wednesday, April 22nd, of heading up to Hamilton, Ontario, which is about an hour and a half drive from me here in Buffalo. And I went up to Theatre Aquarius, which is Canada's National Centre for New Musicals, for the opening night of It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken. The very new production featuring the music of the Tragically Hip. I say opening night, but it was actually still preview week. If you know anything about theater, they have a week before the official grand opening night. And that basically, in so few words, is everything is still basically open to being tweaked and modified and changed around. They really take notice of how moments or scenes react with the audience. Maybe something didn't convey the way that they had hoped, and so they want to go back and tweak it for the next night and so forth. And so actually what I saw was preview week, still the first time that it was performed in front of a live audience. So that was very, very special. And we'll get into it much more here as I talk more about the evening and the production for sure. But it was absolutely phenomenal, and you should definitely check it out. But anyways, it was such a great time in Hamilton. This was actually my first time in Hamilton, Ontario. I've never been there for anything significant. Definitely made a quick pit stop or two on my way to other destinations in Canada, but I have never been to Hamilton for anything, so that was a lot of fun. And my friend Jamie, JD, if you are listening to this and you are part of the hip community, Jamie had mentioned that Hamilton was very similar in aesthetic to Buffalo, and he was most certainly right, especially with the one-way streets If you know, you know. It can be an adventure driving around downtown Buffalo sometimes. And the parking. Yeah, definitely was feeling the Buffalo vibes driving around and figuring out the parking situation and such there in Hamilton. But it is a very cute little city. What we experienced of it, we met at a cute restaurant downtown and hung out for a little bit before we walked over to the theater. And the theater is just a really cute theater, too. It was just a very awesome spot of town. So hopefully I will be back up there to see some more music. I know they just renamed, reopened the TD Coliseum in Hamilton, and there have been quite a few names that have either played there or are making their way through. Actually, when the arena just opened not that long ago, Paul McCartney opened the arena. It was the first show there, and that happened pretty recently, in the last year, I would say. So TD Coliseum in Hamilton is definitely on my list of possible venues when I'm looking at tour dates, because it's only an hour and a half away. So that is very awesome. Anyway, back to this production. It has to be said, because it is so very important to note that this musical absolutely has nothing to do with the Tragically Hip and their story and their history. I had a couple of people ask me what I felt was a great comparison in terms of what this was. And there's quite a few. I've found a couple more that I feel also exemplifies this kind of sort of same like wavelength of this. But to me, the first thing that came to mind when we were discussing it after the show, and I was asking everybody else that was sitting at the table, was if they had seen the movie Across the Universe, which is one of my favorite films. And this production, It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken, I thought was very much along the same vein as Across the Universe, where the music exists within this story, but it's not a biography, but where the music exists within this story, not as a biography, but as a kind of emotional landscape. And there was something interesting this week when I am recording this episode. My buddy Jamie released episode 1 of his 6-part series called A Forest of Whispering Speakers, and it gets into everything, the backstory, the putting together, the execution, the getting ready for opening day, all of the things about this production. I was listening to the first episode today, and on there, talking about the universe in which this story takes place. Does the Tragically Hip exist in this universe of this story? And the answer was no, that the music existed, but them as themselves did not exist in the quote-unquote universe of this story. It's very interesting, though, that while it is not about the Tragically Hip, there are the connections there. This story unfolds in Kingston, Ontario. There's a record store called Cordelia's on Princess Street. And if you know, you know. If you're listening and you don't have any back history of the Tragically Hip, these are certainly little Easter eggs that are layered throughout the set. There's writing on the walls, literally, of the set that when you look a little closer, you'll see a title of a song or, a few lyrics that are etched in there. There's all of these fun, subtle nods that casual listeners, casual fans would definitely catch. And then there are also more of those that the deep fans will get. Either way, honestly, you're going to need multiple viewings to catch them all. I've only seen the production one time, and I know that there is definitely stuff that I didn't catch or that I didn't think to write down in my notes that night because I was trying to be so present in the production as well, of course, because I just didn't want to take my eyes off of the stage. It was very engaging, every part of the story. There was never a moment of the story that was like, oh, should I check my watch and see how long this has been going on? There was never any feelings of that. And to come back to those fun little Easter eggs, that was the really cool part of, finding them myself. And then we did a fun post-show, debriefing. And it was awesome to hear people confirm what I had found or thought or caught, or hearing what somebody else thought or caught or saw. And so that was just a fun little part of the evening, was finding all of these little pieces that were the connection to the hip besides just the music. And the story of this is so well done. I mentioned at the top of the episode, there will be some spoilers, but I also don't want to give all of it away. And it's just a really fantastic story about Waleed. He's a journalist and very esteemed journalist in his country. And a whole situation goes down. He's on the BBC and he speaks out against his country's dictatorship and winds up getting himself in some trouble where he has to leave his country and ends up rebuilding his life in Kingston. And what develops is this deeply human story about displacement and identity and responsibility and connection and finding where you belong. Show powwow, that feeling was echoed pretty unanimously among all of us sitting at the table. So that was very interesting. I did go into this intentionally blind. I did no plot research. I made sure to not consume anything to give any spoilers. I just went in totally open and really excited to see what was going to happen. And that's very rare for me. I'm usually the person doing all the research, doing the notes, getting ready for whatever, especially with something like this that's going to be, obviously I went and wanted to see it as a fan, but obviously I'm going to do a review and do an episode and all of those things. And so for me to go into this with no research beforehand is very unlike me. I will research a restaurant before I go, even though I've been there like a half a dozen times. So I went in just completely open-minded, and it's not like there was a ton of information out there for me to even dive into before this anyways. It was very minimal what the story was even about, and so that was very exciting too. But I will say that there was a bit of apprehension, and we'll come back to that in 1 minute. I actually was having a conversation with Jamie before the production. As I mentioned, we were hanging out at a really cute burger place in downtown Hamilton, and he had asked me what I was most excited about with this show. And my answer was very, very simple. I could not wait to see how these songs were going to take on new life inside this story. Sure, I mean, and understandably, there was this kind of quiet concern among the diehards. We even discussed this before the show, and we discussed this again after at the debriefing session at the Electric Diner in Hamilton. The vibe in this place, oh my gosh. We were actually going to go there before the show and wound up at this other spot and wound up at the Electric Diner anyways, and the vibe was amazing. I want to go back there again. I'm going to go back to Hamilton just to go to the Electric Diner. Anyways, even days after I saw the production and I had some meetings and folks were asking me how it was, how was the production, and there was always this kind of there was always this tone of voice. There was always this energy with this question. Please reassure me that it wasn't stupid. There was just this kind of worry that whatever this production was, that it was going to be kitschy or forced or cringy or who knows, any number of adjectives that you want to use there. And I mean, that's very valid, especially with this fan base is so very precious with these songs. These songs mean so much to people. And so having that concern was very valid. But I'm happy to say now, as I was happy to say to my friends in meetings, and was very happy to talk about at the Electric Diner, that concern didn't last very long that evening. Not even a little. And there wasn't a single moment of cringe or kitschiness or feeling forced or anything like that. I think that it was absolutely phenomenal. There were absolutely moments where I teared up. There were moments where I had goosebumps. There were moments where I laughed. There were moments that, if you were paying attention, you picked up some thing that somebody mentioned and, I got that, or, it was phenomenal. And in short, like I said, if you can see this, go see it. These songs, and coming back to what I had said to Jamie before the production, and he asked me, what are you most excited about going in to see this? And like I said, it was what is going to happen with these songs in this production, in this story. What new life are these songs going to take on here? And these songs felt like they always belonged here. As if they could have debuted inside this production and still carried the same emotional weight. I think that's art at a different level because it goes far beyond lyrics. It's the arrangements, the tone, the emotional placement of each song. Everything shifts. Moments hit differently because they transpired through the story. This production's total runtime was 130 minutes, including a 20-minute intermission, during which we went out to the lobby to mingle among fans. They have some very awesome event-exclusive merch that is available. And they had a very small menu of hip-themed drinks. They had the wine from the winery in St. Catharines, which I went and visited back in August. We did an awesome tasting, and they donated some bottles of Tragically Hip wine for our October event. And then I had this super good apple cider called Road Apples, perfectly named from their album, and it was so delicious. It's actually made a little north of Toronto, if I remember correctly, and it was an absolutely delicious hard apple cider, and so good. Dangerously good for sure. So that was a lot of fun to have some fun little, on brand refreshments. And back after intermission, the second half of this production flew by so fast. Like, before I knew it, we were done, and I was just like, oh, okay, this is over. I mean, it went by so quickly. And for opening nights, like I mentioned, it was technically preview week, but it already felt tight, cohesive. There were very few moments from where I was sitting that I thought needed adjustment. Like, maybe one of the actors, maybe once there was a moment that had apparently been rewritten and added that morning. I'm sure there may have been little spots, but when we were out in the lobby for the intermission, we ran into the associate director, Sara, and she had mentioned that. We talked about a specific scene that, we loved that. And she's like, oh, I'm so glad we actually tweaked that this morning. And we're so glad that it landed because, we had changed that just this morning, and just that was the first time we had run through it. And what a great tweak. It was great. So, there's things that are always changing and morphing during that preview week. And when this production was first announced back in 2025, one of the first things that crossed my mind after the curiosity of, okay, we're going to wait and see how this plays out. This is intriguing, but we're going to wait and see how this plays out. They just announced it, so like, okay, we'll see. But one of the questions that came to mind pretty quickly was, would Gord Downie love this? And after a little bit of thinking, I was like, yeah, you know what? I think that he would. And I felt that all the way up leading into opening night. I even mentioned this to Jamie during our pregame conversation, and a couple of other times over the past year-ish, leading up to this first viewing of the production. And after seeing it, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, he would. And it's not just because of the music, but it's because of the movement. Gord always talked about the music moving through him. If you ever saw the Hip live or Gord perform live with any of his solo or side projects, you know that it was as much performance art as it was a concert. That spirit is alive in this production. It's not copied. It's not imitated. But it's translated into choreography and storytelling in a way that feels raw, expressive, and really intentional. And in doing that, it keeps that energy alive. Cordelia takes on an entirely different meaning within this story. It becomes charged with grief, responsibility, and unresolved guilt, especially through Kate's relationship with her late mother and the record store. It's probably the best example of what this production does so well that even if you'd never heard the song before, it would still hit. But if you have heard the song before, if you are familiar with these songs, you are going to hear it differently after. I actually listened to Cordelia a few days ago because there's just something about, the way that one hits on a sunny spring day in Buffalo. Windows down, shades on. You're like, yes, spring is here. But anyway, it landed a little differently. And I've heard that song, I can't even tell you how many times I've heard Cordelia. And hearing it now, it lands a little differently. Grace 2 was another standout. Obviously, it's already a powerhouse track, but here it builds from this quiet, intimate moment between siblings into something explosive. This music and movement and emotion, it all just opens up, and the goosebumps during that moment. And I always have goosebumps in the feels when Grace 2 is on. Come on. But that was just, it took it to another level. And honestly, the urge to be on your feet during that moment of Grace 2, it was real. By the end of the show, people were standing, and not just for a well-earned standing ovation, but to finally give in to that feeling that had been building all night. We just had to get up and dance because you really can't not move to the hip, right? Scared was another one that I recently listened to. I had Live Between Us, whatever you want to say, on in the car, and that one came on, and it made me recall the moment in the play also. And like, oh yeah, sort of a thing. I remember this part, and that will for sure happen more as I randomly hear songs, kind of going through my Apple playlist, kind of rolling in the car or whatever. And of course, when I'm at a Strictly Hip show for sure, they'll play something and I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I remember this part from the play. And I know that my kids are going to get so sick of hearing me mention, oh, that one time I saw that play and this song was, sorry kids, not sorry. And I had a very interesting thought the other day while I was listening to Goodnight Josephine while on a walk. And this so totally could have possibly been in the play if it fit. And the same can be said about so much of the Hips catalog. And come to think of it, In Between Evolution as an album itself could totally have a whole production made around the music of that as any other album in the Hips discography. And it made me wonder that perhaps that being a possibility is because of the majority of Gord's song lyrics came from snippets of real life conversations, situations, things that were happening around him. And so perhaps in an interesting way, these songs were being written in this interesting way, that the pieces that he took to make these songs came from snippets and parts of life that perhaps that's maybe how he did see the world. Where, someone who is very much into musical theater or something would perhaps see the world a little more in terms of a play where people are bursting into song randomly. So it was a very interesting thought for sure. And the creativity across this production, relentless in the best way. Set design, choreography, costumes, all incredible. But even beyond that, it's the small details. The records lining the shelves inside Cordelia's, the way the world feels lived inside of it. Look closely and pay attention. There is meaning everywhere in this, folks. And what I keep coming back to is this. It's going to be really interesting to see how this lands for audiences who don't already have a deep relationship with the Hips catalog. In Canada, it's pretty much the soundtrack for people's whole lives. And if not, people will at least recognize a few songs. But there will be those in attendance that don't have that history. Those folks that don't have those live music moments etched into their brains of these songs, those memories of summers with friends, or the first time or last time they saw it played live. The people that go to see this production that don't have that history, their connection to these songs is going to be formed through this story. And that's a powerful and interesting thing. There will literally be someone who sees this production and afterward begins their deep dive into becoming a Hip fan. That's pretty awesome. If this production has a future beyond the stage, and I think it should, I'd love to see it captured, filmed, released, made accessible in a wider way, something along the lines of Hamilton, because this is something that deserves to be watched again and again. I want to show everybody this because this is something that deserves to be watched again and again. And before I wrap this up, I again want to mention that my buddy JD just released a 6-part miniseries about this production called A Forest of Whispering Speakers. You can check that out anywhere you podcast. Episode 1 dropped last week, April 30th, and then episode 2 will be dropping this week. So check that out if that's your vibe and you want to get more inside the details and making of It's a Good Life If You Don't Weekend. It's a Good Life If You Don't Weekend is playing now in Hamilton, Ontario until May 24th, and will have a run in Kingston, Ontario beginning this October. There is a whole bunch of links in the show notes for all the things that I mentioned and referenced throughout this episode, so take a scroll through and check them out. And thank you so much for joining me. I will see you around these parts.